So, according to Locke, the development of knowledge begins with the accumulation of simple ideas. The mind, which starts out as an empty space, is filled with contents through the sensations. These simple ideas are colors, shapes, smells, tastes, textures, everything that the sensation can provide, as if nature is filling the mind with an endless supply of separate Lego blocks waiting to be assembled. These simple ideas are all unitary, separate, discrete, atomic. Each simple idea is just one, indivisible into anything simpler still. But in order to do anything with this, the mind's got to be able to put them together. And this is what Locke calls operations of the mind. So this is an innate ability that's in the mind to do stuff with these ideas that come in through the sensations. Now, perhaps the most fundamental of those operations for Locke is memory, right? First of all, we have to be able to retain the ideas, because evidently each simple idea comes and is gone and replaced by additional simple ideas. Memory is had in several ways. Locke says, attention and repetition help much to the fixing any ideas in the memory. So, one way in which we retain things is determined by the attention that we give to it, and repetition. Repetition fixes something in the memory that might otherwise get lost. But the strongest impulses, according to Locke, are probably pain and pleasure. Those which naturally at first make the deepest and most lasting impression are those which are accompanied with pleasure and pain. Memories can, to some extent, be controlled by the will. He says, viewing again the ideas that are lodged in the memory, the mind is oftentimes more than barely passive, the appearance of those dormant pictures depending sometimes on the will. Beyond memory, however, the mind has the ability to discern and to compare. Discern is to distinguish one idea from another, and comparing ideas is to set them beside one another and inspect their resemblances and differences. It is not enough to have a confused perception of something in general unless the mind had a distinct perception of different objects in their qualities. It would be capable of very little knowledge. So Locke seems to indicate here that the flood of simple ideas into the mind, in and of itself, if the mind were unable to do anything further with those simple ideas and make something out of that material, would leave us in a rather fuzzy and confused state at best. Even though Locke insists that simple ideas are discrete and atomic, one idea distinct from another idea, it's still important that the mind be able, through this flood of ideas from different senses over the course of time, that the mind be able to distinguish one idea from another, discern what's one thing and what's another thing, to separate them. Beyond that, the mind compares the ideas, comparing them one with another in respect of extent, degrees, time, place, or any other circumstance. This is another operation of the mind about its ideas, and it is that upon which depends that large tribe of ideas comprehended under relations. So these two operations, once we have been able to retain ideas in the memory, these two operations of discerning and comparing are going to be fundamental to the construction of complex ideas. One other thing comes in here too, once we acquire ideas, and that is important to our thought process in Locke's view, and that is the ability to use signs, as we do in language. And so he says, when children have, by repeated sensations, got ideas fixed in their memory, they begin by degrees to learn the use of signs. One further operation of the mind that is central to Locke's account of knowledge and that poses some real difficulties for the empiricists in general is that power of abstraction. How does abstraction work? How do we form general ideas? My perception of any given dog is always going to be of a particular dog in a particular place at a particular time. That particular dog will be a particular breed with a particular color and length of fur, and so on and so forth. So abstraction, how we get to this general idea of dog that is not Fido or Rover or Lassie or Rin Tin Tin, but just dog in general, according to Locke, is by taking the particular ideas we have and separating out from them the things that distinguish them from other individuals of that same sort. So I think of dog, but I may think of particular dogs, okay, but I subtract from those ideas individual colors, individual sizes, individual locations, particular instances of time, and this is how we get to abstract ideas. Locke says, if every particular idea that we take in should have a distinct name, names must be endless. To prevent this, the mind makes the particular ideas received from particular objects to become general, which is done by considering them as they are in the mind. Such appearances, separate from all other existences, and the circumstances of real existence as time, place, or any other concomitant ideas. Notice two things in this brief explanation of this process of abstraction. One thing Locke notes is that indeed our variety of particular ideas is endless. We have a constant stream of sensations. We wouldn't be able to generate names for each and every distinct, simple idea. If we could, we couldn't retain them. There would simply be too many. That points to another question that Locke doesn't really raise. Each simple idea, according to Locke, is just one atomic idea. So, for example, the experience of a particular color on a particular occasion, that gives me a simple idea. Now, if I perceive a particular given shade of red on one occasion, okay, and then on another occasion I perceive the very same shade of red, whether it's the red of the same object or whether it's the red of a different object, okay, are those two simple ideas? Or are they just one simple idea? Red, after all, seems to be what Locke would call a general idea, and so it have to be generated by abstraction. In any case, we have so many simple ideas, so many particular ideas flooding our mind that it is important to abstract and operate with general ideas that group simple ideas somehow together by abstracting from the differences among many different particular ideas. Secondly, in this passage, Locke says, okay, to prevent this confusion of not having names for the flood of ever-changing particular ideas, The mind has to make particular ideas into general ideas. How does that actually happen? Well, that's the whole process of abstraction, according to him. But note that by Locke's empiricist principles, any general ideas we have, dog, cat, kangaroo, they have to be something that we can trace back to simple ideas, okay? Because there's no particular idea of dog as such. Okay? There are only particular ideas that make the complex ideas that we call Fido or Rover or Lassie. With these operations, then, Locke states, "Thus I have given a short and, I think, true history of the first beginnings of human knowledge, whence the mind has its first objects and by what steps it makes its progress to the laying in and storing up those ideas out of which is to be framed all of the knowledge that it is capable of." So with these abilities to operate upon the simple ideas in this way, the mind is capable, according to Locke, of making three types of complex ideas out of those fundamental simple ideas. One type of complex idea is the idea that we have of objects. Not only is dog in general not in any way a simple idea, okay? Rover is not a simple idea either, okay? Because what do we perceive of Rover? What do we make into Rover? Well, we perceive a patch of color or multiple colors. We perceive textures. If we scratch Rover behind the ears, okay, we see Rover on the sofa or on the floor or outside or fetching a ball, doing different things at different times. There's already a whole endless stream of simple ideas that go into making that object that we then call Rover. So even our idea of the individual is a complex idea. That's the first type of, so complex ideas as such, the idea of an object is the first type of complex idea that Locke refers to here. These complex ideas are made by combining several simple ideas into one compound one. That's the source of all complex ideas. We get another sort of complex idea by taking two ideas, which could be two simple ideas or two complex ideas or a simple idea and a complex idea, setting them side by side, okay, not uniting them into one as we do with the simple ideas that we assemble into our Rover, okay, but holding them apart, setting them side by side, and comparing them. This is the source of our ideas of relations. We get these by bringing two ideas, whether simple or complex, together, setting them by one another so as to take a view of them at once without uniting them into one. This is how the mind gets the ideas of relations. And the third type of complex idea we've already seen. Right? These are general ideas. And as we've seen, those are obtained by separating them from all other ideas that accompany them in their real existence. That's called abstraction, and that's how all general ideas are made. Now there are in turn three types of complex ideas, and there's a little bit of overlap. And here we encounter terms that we have seen before, seen among the rationalist philosophers, although you'll see that Locke treats these terms very differently. Right, so I have ideas, so some of my complex ideas are ideas of modes. We've seen called as modes in Spinoza or Descartes, also called accidents sometimes. Right? A mode is the idea of complex ideas which contain, Locke says, not in them the supposition of subsisting by themselves, but are considered as dependencies on or affections of substances, such as are ideas signified by the words triangle, gratitude, murder, etc. So modes are just like what we've seen called accidents or modes in the rationalist philosophers. They are properties of substances that can't exist without the substances themselves, properties of an object that might characterize that object but can't be separated from the object and continue to exist. So we might have a table, let's say a table that is brown. Okay? We think that the color is a property of the table. We don't think that the table is a property of the color. Okay? It makes sense to say of the table that this table is brown. It would be a very odd way of speaking to say this brownness is table-y. We could get tired of that brown color, sand the table down, refinish it, paint it a different color. We still consider it the same table. We still think of it as the same object, but we've changed the color. We can't, however, say, I really like this particular patch of brown here, but I can't stand that table. I think I'm just going to destroy the table, but keep the color where it is. That doesn't work. So this is what we think of as modes, right? We see of them as depending upon or adhering in objects, but something that can't exist without those objects. So in terms of how we use this term, Locke's using it very much like the rationalist philosophers are, but he doesn't think this is the same sort of an idea as what the rationalist philosophers think, as we will see in just a moment when we get to the next type of complex idea, which is the complex idea of substances. Ideas of substances are such combinations of simple ideas as are taken to represent distinct particular things subsisting by themselves, in which the supposed or confused idea of substance, such as it is always the first and chief. Thus, if to substance be joined the simple idea of a certain dull whitish color, with certain degrees of weight, hardness, ductility, and fusibility, we have the idea of lead. And a combination of the ideas of a certain sort of figure with the powers of motion, thought, and reasoning joined to substance make the ordinary idea of a man. So substance is kind of the glue that holds simple ideas together into an individual object. If I hold an apple, I see a certain color, a certain shape, it has a certain scent, it has a certain taste. All of those are distinct ideas, but in my mind, I associate them together and I tie them together in the same object. I don't think that they're all different objects. So this idea of one object that unites a bunch of diverse, simple ideas, okay, that's what we call substance. And then the final type of complex idea here is the idea of relations, which we've seen before is a comparing of two ideas, one with the other. But what of these ideas? What of these ideas of modes or substances? These are not according to Locke, so he doesn't explain exactly where this idea comes from. So it seems to be rooted in some way in the operations of the mind, right? Because certain complex ideas we see as being dependent upon complex ideas that we identify as objects. Other complex ideas we identify as objects as kind of a way of uniting and holding together diverse simple ideas and treating them as one individual object, which we then call a substance. Okay? But those ideas themselves, the mode, the idea of the mode, the idea of the substance, those Locke treats as obscure, fuzzy ideas that are actually useless in philosophical terms, in fact, anything but clear and distinct ideas. And here he refers to a joke about an ancient Indian philosopher who said that the earth rested and was supported on the back of an elephant. When asked what supports the elephant, said that the elephant was supported by a tortoise. Asked what supports the tortoise, had to answer, well, he doesn't have any explanations anymore. Substance is the same sort of thing. It's a support for something, but ultimately, in Locke's view, it doesn't explain anything. They who first ran into the notion of accidents, says Locke, as a sort of real being that needed something to inhere in, were forced to find out the word substance to support them. Had the poor Indian philosopher who imagined that the earth also wanted something to bear it up, but thought of this word substance, he needed not to have been at the trouble to find an elephant to support it, and a tortoise to support his elephant, and the word substance would have done it effectually. And he that inquired might have taken it for as good an answer from an Indian philosopher that substance, without knowing what it is that which supports the earth, as we take it for a sufficient answer and good doctrine from our European philosophers that substance, without knowing what it is that which supports accidents. So that of substance we have no idea what it is, but only a confused, obscure one of what it does. As we move on in our empiricist philosophers, we will see that some criticisms can be raised against a number of points that Locke makes, a number of his claims, a number of his arguments. Locke often stops asking questions where you might want him most to ask questions and to inquire a little bit further into the implications and what follows from his starting point and his assumptions. Locke often doesn't do that. Nevertheless, Locke introduces into philosophical discourse a number of ideas. Even if he doesn't develop them as much as we think maybe he ought to, he introduces a number of very interesting ideas and concepts that will have great influence on philosophy going on. Although he has this idea that the mind is somehow empty at birth, okay, and the idea that it gets contents of its thought from the outside world, from what we can observe through our senses, okay, Locke also has this idea, it barely hints at it in some ways, that those contents themselves, right, are not just by themselves, right, in any way transparent or evident to us. Okay? They don't really clearly represent anything just in and of themselves. Rather, the mind has to do something with them in order to make them into something. So this idea that's undeveloped, is first there in Locke. Also, although he says that the mind is totally empty at birth, like a blank slate, the mind can do all of this interesting stuff with the contents that it gets. Not just remember and retain stuff, but it can perform all kinds of rather sophisticated operations with them too. So the mind is maybe not just quite as empty as on Locke's own account as he initially makes it out to be. Here again, okay, he points to an idea that he doesn't really develop very much, okay, not beyond the few things that we've seen today. And so it is with lots of other concepts in Locke as well. As we read on and move into Berkeley's 3 dialogues, we'll see that he has some sharp criticisms of a number of Locke's positions. Okay? Nevertheless, Locke introduces a number of very interesting concepts that are going to have influence on Berkeley, Hume, and beyond.